Welcome back. Now, 2023 saw a poor performance of the economy in the face of challenges like inflation, persistent load shedding, depreciating infrastructure and soaring interest rates. However, fuel price cuts in the back end of the year have turned the tide. Projections show an easing of inflation and consequently interest rate cuts. Such circumstances and various renewable energy projects to limit the impact of load shedding show a promising future, whereas persisting problems in rail and ports as well as unemployment and the upcoming elections all point to more uncertainty. Joining us now for a detailed dissection of South Africa's economic outlook for 2024 is Chief Economist at Investec, Annabel Bishop. Annabel, always a pleasure. Good afternoon to you.
Thank you. Hi.
All right, Annabel, keen to get your thoughts on 2023. I think if you were just to describe the kind of economy we saw in 2023 and the economy that 2024 kind of receives, how would you, place that?
I think, 2023 was very weak. We continue to expect economic growth of 0.5%. It really was damaged by severe load shedding. And of course, we've heard from Eskom that 2024 could have even worse load shedding. And of course, 2023 already being the worst on record. Also, of course, as well, in 2024, we did see the congestion of the ports exacerbate, and that, of course, as well, damaged our much needed economic growth. In fact, overall, we've obviously seen real harm come to export activity in South Africa in 2023. And let's not forget as well that we also had weaker commodity prices, all of which negatively impacted the government finances. And leading us into 2024, government has now indicated they're looking to increase borrowings. This is actually a phenomenon that's happening around the world. We're seeing upward pressure on global debt and, of course, debt service costs as well as long-term real yields rise. But, of course, what we're finding in South Africa is that our government revenue is obviously weaker than was previously budgeted, while government is running ahead on expenditure. Expenditure is very, very strong, and government has not cut back on its expenditure. And that, of course, has been the real damage to our sustainability of our finances.
I'm actually keen to get us to contextualize South Africa's economy, looking at the global economy as a whole, but also with obviously the knowledge, Annabel, that we have our own idiosyncratic issues here that are deeply structural and will take a while to fix here. When we look at how South Africa is faring, versus our global counterparts there, do we remain competitive in some areas?
I think, if we could repair the problems that we have at Eskom and, of course, fix the issues at the ports, in other words, if we could have sufficient electricity to meet demand, and, of course, as well, our freight logistics saw the improvement of our rail system and our port system so that everything that we produced and wanted to export could get quickly exported. That, of course, would make a huge difference in terms of South Africa's structural ability to see fast economic growth and, in turn, also, of course, as well, employ more people. We've also come from an interest rate hike cycle, which has added to the woes of 2023 and, of course, 2022. And now 2024 is expected to see interest rate cuts. But once again, that's going to be something that the South African Reserve Bank looks at carefully. It's not something they're going to rush into, just as the United States Federal Open Market Committee has said the same thing as well. They're going to be very cautious. They're not looking to rush into interest rate cuts early this year. That, of course, caused a little bit of recalibration in the financial markets and, of course, added to a little bit of rand weakness. The rand has been quiet early this year, but seen a small amount of volatility. Excuse me, I think going through 2024, we're going to continue to see a volatile rand. Although, what is interesting is that foreigners were net purchasers of South African government bonds last year. It was a modest amount. It was not enough to obviously return the rand to, below 18 to the dollar or even below 17 to the dollar, where obviously it started 2023 at. So our currency is still weak, and that does add to inflationary pressures as well. But looking forwards, we do think there's a strong chance that the Reserve Bank will cut interest rates, particularly in the second half of this year, and that inflation will come down sufficiently for it to do so. Of course, as we know, inflation is currently above 5%, and that's not something which the South African Reserve Bank would see as attractive to create an interest rate cutting environment.
Another challenging part of our economy, Annabel, has been commodities. Are we expecting some form of recovery here with commodity prices? Because, of course, that could give our economy quite a bit of a boost.
So I think, we have seen differences in commodities. And of course, we know that OPEC plus the oil cartel internationally has been giving artificial support to the oil price, for example. And of course, that's, really boosted that energy price. And as we obviously look at South Africa's inflation, that of course had an impact on our inflation figures as well. Looking forwards this year, there's not expected to be a strong upward momentum in oil prices per se. The global economy is expected to be weak, seeing weaker growth than it did last year. That, of course, will take a little bit of support away. It's not expected to go into recession. You're not expected to see activity collapse, but it's just expected to see slightly weaker growth this year than last, and then next year see slightly stronger growth again. So, we really find ourselves in a situation where commodity prices overall are not expected to run substantially stronger this year and provide a solution to South Africa's government finance conundrum. In fact, government, obviously, in an election year, is probably also loath to cut back on expenditure. So, unfortunately, we have seen a deterioration in government finances from a projections perspective with our debt. And, that's something that's likely to run through 2024 as well. Of course, if we look at our economic growth, we are looking for stronger growth. We're looking for about 1% as opposed to the 0.5% of 2023. And that really does come about on some improvement in infrastructure. We are getting some renewable energy projects likely to come online this year, providing a bit of a boost to electricity supply. Not enough to get rid of load shedding, but certainly to help improve. And of course, other infrastructure build as well. So, overall, while we'd say growth would double, it's still a weak economic growth rate for South Africa. And certainly no reason why the South African Reserve Bank would consider that any reason against cutting interest rates. Instead, it's supportive of interest rate cuts.
I'm glad you mentioned the issue of elections, Annabel, because I think it's an important one. I think 40% of the countries around the world will hold elections in 2024, and we're one of them. And that tells me that, in election years, for instance, governments are not inclined to make any bold decisions. It is kind of being in limbo. And I'm wondering if that's how we're expecting South Africa to also, play out its election year. And what that means then from a confidence perspective where we desperately need a recovery.
So I suppose the concern really is that we're likely to go into a coalition government after the election, and that's where the uncertainty and, of course, some of the damage to confidence has come from. It all depends, who the ANC, who's still likely to garner the most votes overall, is looking to go into coalition with. If it goes into a coalition with a more left-leaning political party, whether that's the EFF or the new Nkandla Sizwe party, those obviously are seen as negative for business economic activity, private sector activity, and so for economic growth, as they don't really provide pro-business policies. And of course, if the ANC were to become more centrist, that, of course, instead would obviously be helpful for the private sector. And of course, even a coalition with the DA has been mooted as well. It's obviously far too early to make any decision or, even suggestions about, what exactly the ANC is going to see as its outcome. Some polls have seen around 45% potentially. But again, too early to know what the election outcome is likely to be. And of course, therefore, that uncertainty also weighs on economic, confidence. We think that as we move into the second half of this year, hopefully things settle down and we start to see some improvement in business confidence and economic activity. But, we can't get away from the fact this is a key election for South Africa.
And Rob, we don't have much time left, but I'm also keen to get your thoughts on fiscal policy here. We saw in the MTBPS, Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana making a lot of promises about this upcoming budget speech. I'm keen to get your thoughts quickly on what we can possibly be anticipating for that, or what we must hear from that address.
So, what we should hear is some moderation in expenditure. And of course, even multilaterals are advising that to countries around the world. But unfortunately, not South Africa not being alone in that. But unfortunately, we're probably going to see what was outlined in the medium-term budget policy statement last year. And that really indicated an increase in borrowings, not a cutback in expenditure, and a moderation in revenues. So, that's what you automatically look for when you see the budget. It's what the credit rating agencies look for as well. The concern, obviously, the government South Africa continues to live beyond its means. And of course, at some point, it needs to pull back. And unfortunately, I'm not seeing, strong enough efforts to support economic activity, private sector business activity to really pull economic growth stronger. South Africa continues to be mired in many political morasses, along with many other issues as well. But we'd like to see many of these resolved and, the path clear for 2024 to see stronger economic growth.
Well, Annabel, thank you so much for this conversation. Looking forward to more of these throughout the year. That was Investec Chief Economist Annabel Bishop.